morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today is your last day to tweet me your one-sentence review for American Sniper for the chance to win one of 3 Blu-ray copies of the film, courtesy of our friends at Dolby Atmos. Again, the rules are that you have to tweet me, at Grace Randolph, your one-sentence review for American Sniper, and then you have to include in that tweet the hashtag Dolby Atmos. Good luck, and tomorrow morning I will announce the 3 winners of the Blu-rays, as well as their one-sentence reviews. Now, American Sniper is a Warner Brothers movie, but today the focus of the episode, the 3 stories, and the viewer question even has to do with movie studios, so we do have a very nice theme going here. But the studio in question for the 3 stories is Sony, and it seems that Sony still can't catch a break after the Sony Hack, which happens to be one of the stories for the day. That won't go away, and they have some other not-so-great headlines being made. But we're going to start off with the one that's the least offensive, and the story that I find the most interesting. I know it's not the biggest headline out of the bunch, but I think it's so fascinating and has so much potential to change the way we enjoy entertainment and how talent works in Hollywood that I really wanted to put it up front because I think it's worth your time and attention. So we've known for some time now that the taboos of working on a smaller size screen once you get to the movie screen are fading away. Television was the first frontier for that. We've seen a number of big screen talent go to the small screen and have great success. Now, to be fair, usually it's to rehabilitate their careers, but there's nothing wrong with that because they come back to the movie screen bigger and better than ever. For instance, Matthew McConaughey, although we'll see how long-lived his reconnaissance really is. But then there are other actors like Kevin Spacey who hasn't really been able to go back to the big screen, but is very successful on the small screen, or the digital screen in this case, with his House of Cards series on Netflix. So it's a fascinating landscape, and I interviewed Jason Schwartzman for Big Eyes, and he talked about how he was making a show on Amazon, and there were just a lot of new opportunities opening up as a result of all these different distribution points. So I think we're going to see a sudden explosion of talent moving to different mediums outside of movies, but yet not torpedoing their movie career. Adam Sandler was supposed to be one of the first big people to move over, of course with his Netflix deal, but he had some very bad publicity with his Native American blow-up on set, so we'll see how that does. And Pee Wee Herman as well. But we have 2 new contenders in the digital space that we're going to discuss today for the first story, and one of them is particularly strong. The first, though, is for Crackle, which is owned by Sony. That's how that fits into the theme for the day. But it's Joe Dirt 2. David Spade is finally making a sequel. I don't know if anybody asked for this, but it's a brand. I think it has some recognition, and I think when you are having something that's streaming digitally on a service like Crackle, no word if you're going to have to pay for it or not, but it won't be the price of a theater ticket to go see something in the theater. Maybe if you recognize the Joe Dirt brand and you like David Spade, who I think can be pretty good. I personally like his comedy most of the time. You might be willing to give Joe Dirt 2 a whirl. The only thing I feel bad about is that, David Spade's the star, so good for him, let him take the risk. I feel a little bad. I watched the trailer that Patrick Warburton is in it. I really like Patrick Warburton. He and David Spade actually were recently on The Rules of Engagement, a sitcom produced by Adam Sandler, which is a pretty solid sitcom. Oliver Hudson, Kate Hudson's brother, was on that as well. He's actually pretty darn funny. He's going to be on the new Scream Queens show from Ryan Murphy on Fox, the creator of Glee and American Horror Story. So that's a much better place to go after Rules of Engagement than to a Crackle movie, Joe Dirt 2 for poor Patrick Warburton. But I think it's very interesting, and I think it's also interesting to see another person in the Sandler, entourage, so to speak, going to digital as well. I guess they were like, hey, the Netflix deal worked out pretty well for Sandler, I might as well try it myself over at Crackle. So that's one of the projects that's going digital. The other is that, well, this isn't digital, this is to TV, but it's to, a basic cable network, Lifetime, and that's the Will Ferrell and Kristen Wiig Lifetime movie is going forward. They said they'd scrapped it when it was leaked that they were making it, which I found very disappointing, but it looks like that was just a way to kind of throw people off and kill the story, which worked, and it's now coming out. It's coming out, well, Joe Dirt 2 comes out July 18th, but A Deadly Adoption airs on Lifetime June 20th. And this could be like Sharknado, hopefully, I'm sure Lifetime is hoping, for the network. I think there's tremendous potential here. Will Ferrell has said he's a fan of Lifetime movies. This is a comedic one, though, of course, and it's about he and Kristen Wiig play a wealthy couple who are taking care of a pregnant woman who's having a baby that they plan to adopt. And then, of course, things go horribly wrong. I think this sounds fantastic. I think it's very out-of-the-box thinking for Will Ferrell and Kristen Wiig. Kristen Wiig has been a little too out of the box, in my opinion. You know, Melissa McCarthy, Rose Byrne, even Wendy McLovin-Levy, who is actually on The Goldbergs, which is produced by Adam Sandler. They've all done very well off of Bridesmaids. Paul Feig, who directed it, you guys said I was pronouncing it incorrectly. But, you know, where has Kristen Wiig gone? You know, she's really not done very much with the opportunity that Bridesmaids presented, which is unfortunate. But let's see how this goes for her. And you know what? This might play into our final question of the day, but she seems to be doing projects that interest her more than move her career forward. And if that's her ultimate goal, well, then more power to her. But, you know, she won't be able to make these kind of like side indie projects much longer if she doesn't start having some success rate, because, you know, how long will it take before people go, Kristen Wiig's in that? It's going to tank. You know, you never want people to say that. All right, so that's the first story of the day. I'm curious, will you watch either of those shows? I wouldn't watch movies. I wouldn't watch Joe Dirt 2. I thought the trailer was really weak, and I don't have a, you know, Crackle. I think only has comedians getting coffee in cars from Jerry Seinfeld. Otherwise, they don't have a really strong brand identity in the space, in the digital space. But I will definitely watch the Will Ferrell and Kristen Wiig Lifetime movie. That sounds spectacular. I'm so glad they didn't kill it. All right, so the second story of the day, the second Sony story of the day, this is a big one. And that's the news that was reported in Variety yesterday that the contract between Sony and MGM Bond is going to be over with the Spectre video. So that means no more Bond movies at Sony unless they renew the deal. And everybody in town is expected to bid for the Bond franchise, which is no surprise considering the fact that with Skyfall it became a $1 billion franchise. We'll see how Spectre does. It's apparently rumored to be plagued with horrible script writing problems, you know, having the script tinkered as they began shooting, but we'll see how it turns out. Sam Mendes is, of course, very talented and did a very nice job with Skyfall, and I thought the first trailer looked quite promising. So we'll see. But, you know, this is either going to be Sony's final Bond movie or the one that maybe gets them to renew the contract. But everybody's expected to bid. And that $1 billion, you know, Skyfall did happen under Sony's watch. How much could be attributed to it? It's hard to tell, especially considering how much they've ruined the Spider-Man franchise. It doesn't seem like they've got really savvy franchise players over there at Sony. But it did happen under, you know, with that, during that relationship. So, you know, if it ain't broke, you know, don't try and fix it to some degree. But, you know, at the other time, I think that MGM and Bond might not be able to pass up the tons of money that other studios might, you know, wave in front of them. This would be, I think, as big a shakeup at a studio or in Hollywood since Legendary left Warner Brothers for Universal. That was a really big deal, and a lot of really exciting pictures are now coming out of Universal, like, for instance, Crimson Peak. Let's see, I think the upcoming Kong Skull Island. These are all movies that you would have thought would have been at Warner Brothers because Legendary was with them for so long, worked on their DC movies quite successfully, at least with the Nolan films, brought Nolan to DC in large part, and now, of course, they're over at Universal making their movies there. So it's a very big change, it's a very big deal, and we'll see if if Bond goes to another studio. Interestingly, speaking of Warner Brothers, there are some people in the industry who think that Bond will go to Warner Brothers because of the strong bond between MGM and Kevin Tsuchihara, the head of Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers is building a nice little treasure trove of franchises here, so if they were to also land Bond, that would be quite impressive. Although Universal's having an amazing year, they're at the top of the dog pile this year. Last year Fox had an amazing year. All the studios are doing very nicely. So I would be interested to see where Bond goes, if it goes to another franchise. I don't think that Sony probably is the special sauce, or doesn't seem to be. My biggest thing is wherever Bond goes, I don't really, you know, to me, I'm not like, oh, I hope it goes to this studio, I hope it goes to that one. I think every studio has its high points and its low points. My big thing is I hope they continue to shake things up with Bond. I think one of the things that really re-energized this current run, and why I think what helped lead Skyfall to that $1 billion gross, was that there were some really interesting changes made to Bond in his origin story. These might be echoed in the book. I'm not particularly familiar with Bond, the version on the page, but in the movie version, you know, they never really delved into Bond's past, where he came from. And I think giving him kind kind of a blue-collar background really added a really wonderful layer to the Bond character. You know, why maybe he was willing to bust into these, you know, fancy joints and mess them up in the name of Queen and Country, because, you know, he didn't have the same reverence for them that perhaps someone who went to Eton and did all those, you know, typical upper-class British things would, you know, that same, you know, respect that they would have. And I also think it gave him a bit of a chip on his shoulder and also some insecurities, feeling he didn't really belong. You know, you can put him in the suit, but can you really take his past away from him? And they're going to be exploring more of his past, of course, with Spectre. I speculated from the trailer that Blofeld, whatever character Christoph Waltz is playing, is going to be somehow related to Bond or a part of his childhood. I think that's fascinating to make them two different sides of the same coin. I think that's a really interesting choice. And that speaks to the kind of things, the shakeup that I would like to continue to see with the franchise. I think that didn't happen so much in Skyfall, and while it's nice to see it move to its origins of, oh, here's our new M, and we have a Moneypenny and Q, and adding all those characters, I would like to still see, you know, new elements and depth added to the franchise. So I think wherever it goes, I hope it's a studio that's open to that and pushes the team, the Bond team, whoever it may be for the next movie after Spectre. I don't know if Sam Mendes is coming back or not, but pushes them to go in that direction. I also like Bond exploring his age, although Daniel Craig is not that old, as a BTT viewer pointed out in the recent BTT voice for the Bond upcoming Spectre film. All right, so that's the second story of the day. So I'm curious to how you feel about that. What do you think of Bond going to another studio? What do you think of the potential shakeup in Hollywood? And how do you feel about just the future of the Bond franchise in general? I know it's a little hard to speak to because we haven't seen Spectre yet, but I think we have some idea. Now, the third story is that Sony Hack, which just won't go away. And it seems that there's a documentary, a husband and wife team, who want to make that the focus of their next documentary. And the documentary business is also getting pretty heated as it becomes more competitive and more mainstream. For instance, The Jinx on HBO did a lot to buoy the profile of the documentary, kind of like Michael Moore. So you have another, you know, like Turbo, like, hitting the NOS for documentaries with The Jinx. Now, this is a husband and wife team. They're Egyptian, which I think is very interesting. I think it's very smart for them to move into Hollywood with their next documentary. Their first documentary, which really put them on the map, was called The Square, and it was about the 2011 Egyptian Revolution. It was Oscar nominated, and it won an Emmy, so they're really in a good position for their next project. And I think, you know, whenever you're in that position, you want to make sure whatever you do next will get a lot of attention as well. And I think to cover the Sony Hack is tricky. You know, Hollywood doesn't always like to turn the camera on itself in a negative fashion, but I think it could be very interesting if done well, and if it's as it has the kind of reveals that it is promising. So let's see. So it says it will reveal new theories as to the culprit of the hack, because, you know, everybody believes, you know, on the surface that it was North Korea. Even the U.S. government said it was North Korea. But there are some rumblings within the industry, and there have been for a couple of months now, that it was actually somebody in Sony or someone who had formerly been at Sony. It was perhaps like a revenge job for someone being let go, because there was just too much knowledge of how the Sony inside operation worked, too much bandwidth, etc. You know, it's really believed by a number of specialists that this was not done by North Korea, but instead was brilliantly pinned on North Korea. I mean, that's just fascinating to me. And if this documentary can prove it and keep it from being divulged before they release the documentary, they could have something really unique and hot on their hands, which will move their careers forward even more. They also said they want to explore how this is the quote-unquote, this is their quote, not their terminology, not mine, the 9/11 of cyber attacks. I think that's a little disrespectful to 9/11 because nobody died in the Sony hacks. I mean, some careers, you know, nobody's career even died. You know, there's just a shuffling. So I wouldn't call it the 9/11 of cyber attacks because of that aspect, that life and death aspect. But I do see where they're coming from and how this was a real game changer. And, you know, things in the cybersecurity world will be forever affected by it going forward. However, I think a lot of people are quick to sweep it under the rug because, you know, it wasn't a life or death situation, and it was a little uncomfortable to think that companies could be brought down. Also, you know, maybe people just were like, you know what, let's not bring any more attention to this than necessary. But behind the scenes, people have really shored up their security, their cybersecurity. But I do think it was some amazing repercussions from the hack. The interview was not released, it did not get a wide release in theaters. It really torpedoed the movie in terms of its box office and what it potentially could have done as a James Franco, Seth Rogen feature, especially coming off of This Is the End and Neighbors. And also, like, Amy Pascal fired as the head of Sony. She came back with a development deal as an outside producer, but still. And so it was a big deal, but we'll see. I'd be very impressed to see what this documentary can do. I think the only way it will really be a newsmaker is if it really can prove a different theory. But I'd be fascinated in that, and then you can almost be sure that will then get picked up to be a movie. Kind of like Bat Kid over at Warner Brothers. They're releasing the documentary, but then also Julia Roberts is making a fictional or a narrative film based on the true story. All right, so those are the 3 Sony stories of the day. Now for the viewer question, I said it was about studios, and this comes from a regular BTT viewer, Angel Major Joy. Thank you, Angel. Always enjoy your comments. Very noticeable avatar. And Angel Major Joy says, I agree that filmmaking is a team business. This is in response to my talking about Sofia Coppola yesterday leaving The Little Mermaid at Universal. So Angel says, I agree that filmmaking is a team business. But is it so much of a team business? But if it is so much of a team business, then how come you always side with the studio, Grace? You tend to choose what the studio wants over the directors and other artists. Do you ever consider that maybe the studio is being unreasonable on budgets for their selection of actors they want in the film? Maybe the director makes valid points. Maybe actors and other people involved in the project make valid points towards a project. Now, I'm not forgetting that the studio is the one with the money, but not everybody wants to be a commercialized puppet to be successful. Directors, actors, and other people behind the camera, other than the finance people, have their own integrity to live up to. Not everyone is willing to sell themselves so easily. I thought that was a great question, Angel Major Joy, because I feel that others would share that same sentiment hearing what I had to say yesterday. So I really wanted to take the opportunity to clarify, and thank you for pointing this out. Now, I think the way you're looking at it, Angel, is a little bit too black and white. This is a situation with a lot more grays, right? I think that it's a little bit childish to say, hey, Warner Brothers, Universal, give me what I want or I'm walking. I think that a sophisticated professional works with the studio to get what they want. Now, sometimes you have to resort to childish, tactics, but at the end of the day, just like that famous line by Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire, you got to ride the studio's ass like Zorro to get to the finish line. Because at the end of the day, the person that really suffers is you. Sofia Coppola, Edgar Wright, Cary Fukunaga, these movies will go on and be made with other talent. And where does that leave the directors who walked away, right? I mean, who really suffered? The director. It's like the old saying, cutting off your nose to spite your own face. Cutting off your own nose to spite your face. Or another great saying, live to fight another day. Now, I said childish tactics because there's a really famous story about Francis Ford Coppola. And when he was making The Godfather, the studio came to him and they said, look, we really want Robert Redford to play Michael Corleone. And Francis Ford Coppola couldn't believe they actually suggested that. And they said, look, Robert Redford's a big star. We think this needs a star in the lead role. And we don't know who this Al Pacino is. And so we really want you to cast Robert Redford as Michael Corleone. And Francis Ford Coppola tried and tried and tried to dissuade them from this decision. And they just wouldn't budge. They were like, Robert Redford will make a great Michael Corleone, and America loves him, and they will all go see this movie because he's in it. So, did Francis Ford Coppola walk off the picture? No, he did not, as we all know. Instead, he actually started crying and screaming and rolling around on the floor in the conference room, having like basically a emotional episode to convince and to show how much he didn't want Robert Redford as Michael Corleone. And he got his way. It worked out. This is similar to George Lucas with Star Wars. They didn't want to give him a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of faith in Star Wars. So did George Lucas say, I'm worth more than that. See ya, suckers. No, he said, well, can I have the merchandising rights? And because nobody cared about merchandising rights then, he got the merchandising rights and went on to make tons of money. So he not only lived to fight another day, he ended up being hugely victorious and changing the entire landscape of Hollywood to some degree, especially with industrial light magic. So what I'm saying is that if you want to just be an artist, that's fine. That's great, actually. It's more than fine. But then you have no business in Hollywood. Hollywood is a business. It's called show business. And it's the marriage of art and business. I'm not saying art is important, but you really have to, to navigate the choppy waters, the politics and the business aspects of Hollywood if you want to survive and get your art out there. Sure, it might not be what you 100% originally intended, but you can make sure it's close to it. Just get the movie out there, get the success, and then the next movie. You'll have even more creative control, and you'll be able to eventually get perhaps exactly what you want. And then you can, like some filmmakers, go too far when you're allowed to get exactly what you want, like Nolan and the Wachowskis, and then lose your creative freedom. But I think it's important to remember that Edgar Wright could have just done a few scenes that did what Marvel wanted, right? And now look where he is now. He's back to making the films that he was making. Like, he was up for Star Trek 3, didn't get it, probably because of what he did over at Marvel. Like, will we ever see Edgar Wright on a really big picture again? I think it's unlikely unless he's somehow able to really do a good job with his upcoming film that he's doing. But we'll see. I think that Scott Pilgrim and then Ant-Man, that's 2 strikes against the guy. Cary Fukunaga, what will he do next? Who knows? He doesn't have another project lined up. Yet someone else will make it with Will Poulter, which is brilliant casting, and I think that could still do very, very well. And then where will he be left? And then with Sofia Coppola, maybe Universal's right. I mean, I think it's important to remember that. Another important thing to remember when you're talking about the studio is don't assume the studio is evil. That's not going to benefit you. Assume that sometimes, sure, sometimes they have a Robert Redford as Michael Corleone suggestion, but sometimes they're right. So you really have to just say, why do you want to do this? You know, or you can just lock yourself in your trailer until they agree to do what you say. You know, I mean, sometimes that's just, you know, you can't give up the fight. And maybe Universal was right that Maya Thurman Hawke was too young, wasn't a good choice, wasn't commercial enough of a choice. And they're doing Sofia Coppola a favor saying, look, all of your movies basically perform the exact same way at the box office, and you're getting less and less awards recognition. So take a page from our book as well. We want your artistry, but we also want a little bit of our mainstream blockbuster filmmaking factory. So let's just, you know, mash these two together and get something really amazing. But Sofia Coppola was like, apparently, I only want to make the movie I want to make, and I'm not willing to be open to what you need me to deliver. So what are the bottom lines here? It's not a black and white situation. The studio isn't always evil. They're a necessary evil, but sometimes they're right with their suggestions. Also, live to fight another day. Don't give up, and then, you know, don't feel that just because you walked away and you have, as you said, Angel said, they have their integrity, right? Well, you know, I had this conversation with someone in the viewer comments recently, and someone said, if just 5 people enjoy a movie, that's enough. And my response was, well, if that's enough to keep you happy and put a smile on your face when you're on the unemployment line, when you can't get another job in Hollywood, no one will fund your next movie, no one will take your call. If you entertaining those 5 people, if you can just say, well, I did what I set out to do and that's enough, then that's fine. But just realize that that's the deal you're making. And remember that if you want to go into the movie business in a way that people all over the world see your movie and you compete for awards, because even the award circuit is very political and very business savvy, this is a world you're going to have to enter. Or else you're going to be somebody who makes films that, you know, maybe exist somewhere, but you're not going to be in the arena that you've come to love and what inspired you to want to make movies in the first place. So just remember that. Business and politics are never going to go away, and if you want to be a part of Hollywood, you gotta ride Hollywood's ass like Zorro to get to the end goal. All right, so Angel, Major Joy, I hope that answered your question. I hope that, or at the very least, gave you some new perspective onto the discussion. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question. Don't forget to tweet me your American Sniper one-sentence review, and you can check out some other episodes right now.